little oil painting, and I gave it to my father for a Christmas present. And that same Christmas, I asked for oil paints. And the paints that I used on that painting were sort of given to me by my neighbor across the street, a man by the name of Dr. Symington. And on the back is written, this picture was painted with oil paints by Ken MacDougall. I wrote that on there. And I got oil painting number 1. And at December 20th, my father wrote this, December 20th, 1944, age 11, and given to his old man for a Christmas present. He called him his old man. Dr. Symington, Morton's father, Morton's a friend of mine, gave me some of his oil paints, and this is the result. Painted in December 44 in Symington's house, 126 Kohler Street. And then I gave it to my father. But you know what's interesting about this little painting is that when I gave this to my father and he gave me oil paints, Dr. Symington also had oil paints, of course, because I used those. My father started to paint a little bit because he was a pretty good artist as well, but his life was engineering. And Symington was medicine. But they started to paint that winter and that spring and that summer. Started to paint. And then there were some more people in the community who were painting. Harry Foster, Charles Carrington, a wonderful teacher, and a number of others. And they began to meet maybe once a month at somebody's house. And then they decided to, well, why don't we form a little group or a little club or a little society or something, which they did. And they called it the Algoma Art Society. And the first president they voted was my father.
Stuart MacDougall was his father. I'm sure Stuart's work influenced Kenny. And then when he first came to, when he first was drawing in my comic books, I mean, that was beginnings.
1958. I'm dating myself, that's quite a while ago. He was just finishing his third year of the Ontario College of Art, and I had just got out of high school and wanted to go to art school. So he said, you know, I know this school in Chicago, the American Academy of Art. I did that. He influenced me that way. Then Ken decided, him and Eddie Kasiba, to go to Hawaii. And I wish I would have went along, because he said that's the most exciting thing he ever did in his younger life.
We wanted to go and paint and do things different when we were young. Him and I boogied around quite a bit around in the country anyways. North Dakota and South Carolina and North Carolina and all over the place. Just on a spur of a moment, go for a Sunday drive and end up in North Carolina. We always carry our sketchbooks. And we ended up in Hawaii. Painted there for a while. I stayed a year. Kenny stayed 6 months. And he was kind of a little scared of getting drafted. Well, I guess he had a little bit of military training. I went in. I tried to get in there. I tried to join up. He told me they don't take old men. I was 28 years old.
I worked in a sign shop, and so did Kenny, and we learned how to do hand lettering. And there was no other way in those days, like today where they have Letraset, or they don't even have that anymore. It's everything's computerized. We both learned how to be sign painters.
Back in the early days, there was 3 Kens, Ken MacDougall and myself, and another Ken came in, and it was Ken Danby. And we worked together designing signs. We worked at a couple of shops. One on Bruce Street was called Leon Signs. This was 1958, 1960, 61, in that area. And also worked on James Street in a sign shop called P&S Signs. But Danby, we're not supposed to talk about Danby here, but he was a character. He'd sing all day long. It drove us crazy. He loved to sing, "This land is my land, this land is your land." He sang that all day and drove us crazy.
They called me to work at CJI-CTV. I called Kenny because I had no help. He had just come back from Hawaii, so he came in and he worked with me for 10 years. And this is the kind of stuff we did, tons of it. I mean, it's a lot. There he is with his outdoor look to everything he did. And these are Ken's, but we both did a ton of these. They were called tell-op cards. That's Ken's work. hand done. Simpson Sears, Toyland. The Train, that's really imaginative with all the lines coming from the letters. Happy Holidays from the Orpheum Theatre. This shows how talented Kenny's hand lettering with little brushes was. You look at that, it's perfect. There's no mistakes in that. Even the thick and thin letters, which are hard to do. And this one, especially here, another nice one. Another one, showing his imaginative side. We were good friends, and Ken worked with me for 10 years before he went to Sioux College and taught art there, and certainly was a good teacher too.
When I started there, it was black and white days for most people. But you know what, every time I look at these things, I think to myself, you know, when you look at that, I mean, I did that. I did all of these, and yet I did those, well, call them fine art paintings upstairs that there's just somehow no relation between the person that did these and up there. I mean, look at this thing here. These cartoons. And these look nice on a black and white set because they got lots of form to them. Here's that thing about form again. Eh? The enjoyment of forms. Well, look at these heads. There's certainly lots of form in them. You know, the highlight and the shaded side, and the toning of the hair here to make it feel like it's not flat, and the form of this guy's face and skull. But then again, I keep thinking, I did that? And then I look at those paintings upstairs and think, holy gee.
Sometimes we had slow periods when we weren't doing these small cards all the time. We would have slow periods, and Ken would just take a sheet of paper and put it on his slant board, and he'd start drawing a scene from Batchewana or Montreal River. And it was just in his head, like he just had it. And he would start drawing this, and then he would take it home and paint it. It was all up here.
Another amazing thing about his work is how he can paint from memory. And I think he's a bit critical of that particular technique where artists use photographs to work or to develop their paintings from. Ken works either on the spot or he works from a sketch. And it's amazing. The sketch doesn't contain everything that's contained in the painting. So it's amazing what he remembers, or I don't know if it's everything that he remembers or if it's part of his imagination, but it still looks realistic. So he really has that ability to capture an image. He stores it in his brain somewhere, and it just comes out his fingertips. It's amazing. It's wonderful.
He draws with a great deal of confidence, and he draws both with line and tonal values working together. He's a fully kind of integrated draftsman, and with a very, very powerful hand-eye coordination. And, I've never, ever witnessed him hesitating. He just looks at the subject, studies it for a while, stands back and goes to the easel and works on it in a very confident manner. His power of observation is excellent. He captures without photographically imitating, but he's able to capture and interpret nature in a really dynamic way. And the same with his close-ups of rocks. They stand out as well, the lichen, the moss, the water running through them.
I remember looking at his work earlier when we were first painting. He sort of had a little bit stylized around the group of 7 and a little bit on the illustrative side. But throughout the years, he's gotten to be Ken. He's gotten to know Algoma that much better. In other words, he's starting to, instead of just doing a pretty picture, he's painting with more feeling, more depth to it.
Ken certainly grew up, as we all did, with the knowledge of the Group of Seven, and having been raised in the area that was key to their development, it was certainly easy to see where he could be influenced. And his father, Stuart, was a friend of A.Y. Jackson's. They painted together. Ken, I know, when he was younger, painted with A.Y. Jackson, and that influence would have been easy to follow, but Ken struck out in his own direction. It's quite different, actually, than the Group of Seven. It's more realistic. It's more observed. His compositional skills, his use of texture, those sorts of things, and the way he looks at nature in terms of its moods and in terms of it almost being a microcosm. His close-up of rocks, for example, his mist on the piers of the bridge, those sorts of intimate views of nature are very different than the Group of Seven.
There's only one person that paints like Ken MacDougall, that's Ken MacDougall. And he represents Algoma, I think, much more than the Group of Seven ever done. Because he lived it, they didn't. He came up, stayed a week in the boxcar and went back home. But he's lived in this territory for practically all his life.
He is dedicated his whole painting length to painting Lake Superior. And like I say, he knows every inch of Lake Superior. He's sketched for years here. He has it's within him that he always has to be drawing. No matter where he is, he's drawing. Like over at Eddie Casiba's Mary's lunch there, he's drawing those interesting people that come in and out of there. He draws everything. Everything he looks at, he draws. He draws from television, anything moving. He draws, and he paints from his drawings. He has hundreds of drawings.
I got so many here, to tell you the truth, I don't know which one's to frame, which one's not to frame. There's probably about 700 or 800 of them in there. And about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I went through all of them. And I would come down here and I'd spend a couple hours almost every day going through them. And I would lift up a page in one of my big sketchbooks like this and look at the very first drawing that I haven't seen maybe for a couple of years. And as soon as I look at it, it's a yes or a no. No in between. And I'd look at it and I wouldn't like it. There'd be something wrong with it somewhere, you know, and I would just tear it out of the book and fold it in half and tear it in half and throw it on the floor. And I was putting drawings in the garbage almost every week. I probably discarded maybe 300 or maybe even more, because they just, you know, like I say, there'd be something wrong somewhere. And I would just throw them away, just get rid of them. But most of these that I have left of the 700 or 800 back there, I could probably filter through them again, but I'm not going to bother. I went through it once, and I think I'll just leave it at that. I was painting quite steady for quite a number of years, about 8.5 years, and Zoltan Zabel was the art director at Sioux College at the time, and he was leaving, and he was after me to go up there and teach, and I really didn't want to teach. I thought, oh, are you crazy, Zoltan? I couldn't teach, you know. He said, well, come on up and just see what it's like, you know. So I would go up there and meet his students in an afternoon. I did that in the fall about 4 or 5 times. I thought I'd be too nervous as a teacher. But once I got in the classroom, watching the students, and I'd see them working on something in Zoltan's class, and they would ask me a question about, do you think I got this color right, or these lines, or should I have the text further down or further up? You know, things like that. And all of a sudden I'm involved in what this student is talking. I don't even know where I am. I'm just talking to this student. And then I'd leave and think, you know, that wasn't too bad. So Zoltan, with his persuasive powers, finally convinced me that I would really enjoy teaching. And so I committed myself to it. And I never let the job interfere with my fine art stuff. I kept doing my drawing and my painting